Hello everyone, Luciano Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. Today is March the 4th, 12:33, Rio de Janeiro time. We are starting one more live stream, and as usual, you can share topics of your interest to be discussed live. We can discuss topics in general from a high-level perspective. Typically, we cannot dwell, we cannot work on details of a specific fact pattern because you're not supposed to give consultations live or for free, according to the Brazilian and the Portuguese Bar Association. But yes, we can discuss subjects in general, and I'm going to be glad to discuss your topic of your interest. All right, let's take a look, see if we have any comments so far in our chat window. Not really. Let me know if you can see me, if you can hear me okay, so I know everything is working as it should. And in the meantime, we're going to be taking a look at news in Brazil. All right. And today's top news is about Banco Master, Bank Master. And this case is interesting in a sense that it does show how entangled, like the, powerful people in Brazil are, right? So you have like those folks from the banking system, and they are connected to people in the Congress, and they are connected to people in the Supreme Court of Brazil. Okay, so that's what this is about. And then you're going to see, basically about 12 different headlines talking about, Banco Master and all those entanglements, to very powerful people in Brazil. Naturally, you also see, news about the war. And then very interesting, like, different newspapers, they are going to have the editorials, and they are going to be sharing their opinions about the war, about, the choices that are being made by the United States. And that's something you're going to see, in different Brazilian newspapers. And I guess it's somewhat similar to what you see in the U.S. In the U.S., every now and then you're going to, find editorials from the New York Times and from the Wall Street Journal, like explaining what they think about a certain subject, right? So you see something similar over here, this opinion in Portuguese, opinion, right? It's basically this newspaper, Estadão, talking about the choices made so far by the United States, Israel, and Iran. Okay, this one is also very interesting, right? Like this one is calling my attention for sure, okay? And, sorry about that. But the idea here is that, employers are spending, for the first time over 50 billion reais in labor claims, right? So if you read like this article, or if you research about this topic, is a very concerning topic from my perspective, and it is one of the reasons why we don't like the business investor visa in Brazil, because of this reality of employees suing their former employers for fake bogus claims, right? Like, and I'm sure there are many legitimate labor claims, right? Like, I mean, it would be unreasonable to expect that every single employer would do the right thing. But what I can tell you from experience, right, and not only with our firm, but many other business owners as well, is that there is just like a cultural component in Brazil of fabricating labor claims and try to take a second a second bite at the apple, if you will. Okay, and this is like a new record, and I think it shows that unfortunately, this thing is out of control. And another, very perverse consequence, is that many employers, they tend to pay less than what they could, because the more they pay, like the higher it would be a labor claim down the line, right? Like, so I saw that happening multiple times. I heard from business owners, they say, listen, I could pay more to my employees, but because of this labor claim reality, guess what? I'm going to, separate part of the money that I could be paying in salary. I'm going to send, like to a savings account. So when someone sues me, right, like for a fake bogus claim, guess what? I have a pool of money here to pay off this thing. But, the consequence here is very perverse, because you are actually, taking money away from, those decent folks, those decent employees, and you're kind of, paying, or, you're kind of giving a benefit to the one who is filing a bogus claim, right? And to be a little bit more technical in this subject here, what happens is that, typically, or, for most of the case, the employee doesn't have a downside. So there is no cost to the employee, right? Like the attorneys in this field, they are going to work on a contingency basis, meaning, like they're just going to grab an employee, fabricate a claim, and get a share of the money that they're going to be able to take away from the employer, right? And if the employee doesn't win, guess what? There is no downside, right? The employee is not going to have to pay all the costs that were faced by the employer to defend themselves. Okay, so this is just like, a highlight. And it's very interesting when you see this type of headline, because the labor claim culture is so ingrained in the Brazilian society that, typically for most people who don't know other systems, they assume it's just part of the reality, right? Like, but when how things work in other countries, even in Latin America, right? I'm not just talking about the United States or Europe, but I'm talking, like on a global scenario. When Brazilians, they don't know how things work elsewhere, they assume that's just how things work in general, right? So that's the headline over here. And let's take a minute to share about Remax. That's our partner for real estate agents in Brazil. They are based in Leblon, Rio de Janeiro, but they actually assist with acquisitions throughout the country. They work on naturally getting a short list for you, okay? And if you need like listings, if you are starting your journey in terms of buying real estate in Brazil, do yourself a favor and contact Remax. All right, let's go back to our live stream and see who's on. General Principal, good to see you, General Principal. Boa tarde, Senhor Oliveira. I can see and hear you. Hope everything is well. Yes, everything is well. And glad that you're showing up. Virgílio, boa tarde, Dr. Luciano. Greetings from Lisboa. Hey, Virgílio. All right, glad to hear about you and that you are in Lisbon. That's so good. And how is the weather over there, Virgílio? Like, I know there were like it was a really long string of raining and storms, right? And like people I know in Portugal, and by the way, my mother is still in Portugal, right? Like my mother, my sister, they all live in Portugal, and they were complaining about the raining, right? Like, I mean, there was a lot of let's say results from the raining. There was storms as well, and wind storms. I forgot about a city. There was a stadium I was there recently, actually in November, and it looks like the stadium was kind of destroyed, something like that. But yes, I hope Lisbon is in good shape now and everything is back to usual. Matt Gaines, oi, Dr. Oliveira, glad to see you. Glad to see you here, Matt. And Adrian, I hope you guys are doing well. All right, Virgilio sharing 20 Celsius, but windy, right? Okay, I mean, it sounds like good weather to me, right? As long as it's not raining nonstop like it was for, I don't know, a month and a half, Virgilio, right? Like, I mean, it sounds like a good outcome. All right, so I have something here, this is from a current client of ours. She's buying, property in Brazil, and she was asking for us to discuss about finance for foreign citizens in Brazil. So the idea here is that, let's say you want to buy property in Brazil as a U.S. citizen, as an European, or as a foreign citizen in general, right? Like, I mean, do you have access to finance or not? So that was part of her question. Another part of her question was about finance directly with the seller. Okay, so I'm gonna try to address some of that, and in your view, feel free, to make follow-up questions. Right, this is not legal content by any measures, right? So we have a little bit more leeway to discuss the topic and even answer questions. All right. Which is not always the case for legal stuff, because again, we are regulated by the bar associations in Brazil and in Portugal, all right? But talking about finance, right? The idea is you come into Brazil, you are not a resident, you are basically starting your journey in Brazil. Do you have access to finance or not? And, it's going to depend on many factors, but in a line, I'm going to answer to you that it's usually an uphill battle, okay? It's going to be an uphill battle because if you think about the two main requirements, they are going to be very similar to what you have in other countries, in the United States included. And those two requirements are going to be credit score, right, / history, and income, right? These are the two main factors that are going to be evaluated when you are applying for credit in Brazil. And in terms of the credit score, very interesting, probably until 10 years ago or 8 years ago, I don't know when was that anymore, but there was no such a thing as a credit score in Brazil. So basically in Brazil, you would have, either good credit or bad credit. There was nothing in between. And then, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Expedia from the United States who came to Brazil and partnered up with Serasa, right? Serasa is like a credit bureau in Brazil, and they introduced the concept of a credit score, meaning a number that is going to, provide you with nuance. So it's not more just good or bad credit. Now you have a score. And that was, again, introduced by a U.S. credit bureau in Brazil. And now, of course, the concept is great and it's taking off. And nowadays, most, if not all, lenders, they are going to rely on a credit score. And guess what? If you're just arriving in Brazil, you don't have a credit score, you don't have a credit history, and therefore this is going to be a concern, or this is going to represent a challenge for you to secure finance. And before you ask, naturally, whatever you have as a credit score in the U.S. is not going to be the same in Brazil, because in Brazil, of course, the credit history, the transactions, everything is going to be based in the Brazilian markets, right, and not the U.S. market. So it's not like Expedia is going to say, well, I know this folk, by the way, because he's from the U.S., and therefore let's give him a good credit because I know from the U.S. No, those systems, they are segregated, right? Your history doesn't come from the United States. You need to create your credit history or your credit journey in Brazil. And therefore, this is like the first challenge faced by foreign citizens. The second component is going to be the income, right? And even if you have a very meaningful income in the United States, this income cannot be easily verified by banks in Brazil. So let's assume you provide a tax return from the United States, or let's assume you are providing a W-2 from the United States, or even bank statements. The Brazilian lender, they don't have a way to verify if that information is legit or not, right? And whenever you're dealing with financial services, they do need to follow certain processes. They cannot just take any document that you're providing and assume they are good. And therefore, many banks, I would say, most of the banks or almost all the Brazilian banks, unless you have verified income in Brazil, they are not going to take into consideration your income from abroad. So you could be making a ton of money abroad, and typically that's not going to be meaningful in Brazil, if you will. All right, so that's the second component. And maybe just to share, because I'm just talking about the challenges, I'm going to talk a little bit about how foreign citizens can, over time, overcome those challenges. And this is not going to happen overnight. There is no trick. There is no scheme. There is just like, a conservative hard work that you're going to be doing to your advantage. And the first one is like once you have the CPF, you can, get like a cell phone service. You can start to buy things on credit. Let's assume you get the card as a resident. You could get a bank account with Nubank. Nubank, they are going to give you a very tiny allowance credit-wise. And once you are using that, Nubank is going to be understanding that you take good care of your credit card, and they are going to be increasing your lines, and this is going to be reported to the credit bureau. And guess what? Like over time, now you're going to have a credit score, and you're going to have a credit history in Brazil. And yes, it does take time. That's how it works. That's how it works in the US. That's how it works in Europe, and that's how it works in Brazil. In terms of the income, many U.S. citizens, even if they are living in Brazil, or people from Europe, any foreign citizen for that matter, they may be living in Brazil but earning their income abroad. And how are you going to present this income? Guess what? After you become a tax resident in Brazil, which is going to happen based on different triggers, and I'm going to talk about just two of the triggers. One trigger is when you acquire permanent residency, and the second trigger is when you exceed 183 days of a physical presence in Brazil in any given 365 days. Not calendar days. I'm not talking about calendar. I'm talking about a moving bracket trying to catch you. So if you exceed this timeline, you are a tax resident in Brazil, and you're going to need to file your tax return in Brazil, declaring your global income, right? So if you have, I don't know, like X income in the United States, you need to declare this X income to Brazil. And once you declare income through your Brazilian tax return, guess what? Your Brazilian tax return is going to be a great way for you to prove your income to a Brazilian lender, right? So in a couple of years, potentially, you could have a good credit score. You could have, a reasonable credit history. By U.S. standards, a reasonable credit history starts potentially at 10 years. But in Brazil, I think, the lenders are a little bit more flexible. So 2 years, it could be meaningful. And naturally, if you're filing your taxes in Brazil, your tax return would be a reliable way for the lender to assess your income. All right. So now we spoke about we talked about the challenge. We talked about like a potential strategy for you to overcome this challenge, and now we're gonna talk a little bit about private lenders, or maybe seller finance. There was another question from our client, and basically she was saying, listen, if I'm gonna buy a property from a seller, what's the usual number of installments? What type of interest should we apply to the transaction? What type of index are we gonna pick? There are different indexes. There is one index that comes from the Brazilian government. There is another index that comes from a major university in Brazil, or is actually a foundation. Is Fundação Getúlio Vargas, also known as FGV, and they all publish different indexes that you can use to correct, installments for a certain payment plan. Now, this is unfortunately going to be up to you as the buyer and the seller to decide, and it's all a matter of negotiation, and even more than negotiation, I think it is a matter of leverage, because different markets, they are going to behave differently depending on how much power a buyer will have in that specific market, right? So when we're talking about Rio de Janeiro, for instance, if you're considering the south of the city of Rio de Janeiro, right, we call Zona Sul, or the South Zone. That's how we call it in Portuguese, Zona Sul. Zona Sul is basically Leblon, São Conrado, there is Joá, Lagoa, Ipanema, Copacabana, right? This is the south zone of Rio de Janeiro. Because of demand, because demand is very high in the south area of Rio de Janeiro, guess what? It's basically non-existing any type of finance provided by the seller. I mean, there is zero reason for them to help you, in any way. Even if you're paying a really high interest for the seller, typically they don't want to take their chances. They're going to say, listen, why would I extend finance to you if I can basically sell to the next folk, for full price, without any risks whatsoever. So for the Rio de Janeiro market, seller finance is extremely rare. I'm not going to say, impossible to find, but I would say, extremely rare. Now, if you go to Santa Catarina, right, is a couple of states down south from Rio de Janeiro, guess what? There is a culture of developers providing finance to buyers. So, they are going to typically make a number of installments, possible, usually 24 or 36. Naturally, sellers are not going to be able to offer the type of finance you would see in the United States or even in Brazil for residential purposes. The traditional finance in Brazil, it could be for 20 years, for instance, right? Like in the United States, I think you have a 15, 20, even 30 years in the United States. But in Brazil, like the 20-year type of finance, that's basically, just like with banks, and banks that are going to be extremely conservative when reviewing your profile. Again, sellers, when providing finance, they are going to be usually doing they're usually going to be doing something like 24 months. Tops is going to be 36 months. Another perspective on seller finance is that seller may be selling you something that's not desirable enough for someone to come and pay in full. You see, like if you think about Rio de Janeiro, and if you think that if you consider that in Rio de Janeiro, sellers are not going to finance because they don't need to do so. If you're buying elsewhere and the seller is willing to finance, it means that there are not enough buyers in the market, or maybe the price that the seller is asking for is a price that the market does not accommodate. All right, so here we go. It's more like something that you're going to negotiate with the seller, and it could be it could be 12 installments, it could be 24, it could be 36, and it could be even more if the seller is willing to accommodate. My concern here is that when you find such a seller, in my understanding, it means that whatever you are buying is not as well sought as properties elsewhere. I hope that makes sense. So these are the dynamics of, like from a very high perspective, a very brief take on finance in Brazil for foreign citizens acquiring real estate. All right, let's see what else we have. General principle, you have spoken about união estável and how one can be taken to court for resources after separation. Have you seen a minimum duration requirement where the court considers you união estável? General principle, there is no such a thing, right? There is no such a thing. I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, people would say, well, you should have at least a couple of years, at least 1 year. Nowadays, there is no such a thing. There is no such a thing. In my experience, right? In my experience, let's say the shortest duration of a relationship for someone trying to frame our client, as he was in a união estável, it was 6 months. Right? So believe it or not, like this gentleman, he was with a lady for 6 months, and she was claiming like união estável, and I don't recall like how we did settle that case. It was settled to our client's satisfaction, but I think he gave her like a substantial sum of money. His case was a little bit more complex, because he was actually, like saying that she was his partner, right? And they would buy a property and they would, live in that property happily forever. So there was a lot of mistakes made by our client. But we were able, right, to get a settlement for a fixed fee before this went to court. But there was a 6-month relationship, general principle. So as you can see, very concerning. There is no minimum amount of time, right? But, it should be something based on common sense. Again, this was a 6-month relationship, but unfortunately, our client was like representing to everyone that lady was, he wasn't saying she's my wife, but he was saying like, I think it sounds better in Portuguese. The translation doesn't convey the same meaning, but he would say to everyone, this is my woman, right? This is my woman. Okay, so there was the problem with his case. Now, if you're going out with someone occasionally, right, for a year, like you guys are not sharing, the same residence. You're just meeting like occasionally. I don't know. You meet 1 week, yes, the other week like you're elsewhere. Maybe both of you have like more than one relationship. Not that I am advising on that, right? Like I'm just like kind of building a scenario over here. And then, even if this is more longer term, maybe this is not going to come back to bite you in the neck, because the way that you're dealing with this relationship is not like you were in a marriage, right? But if you are behaving with this relationship as if you were in a marriage, guess what? In a really short amount of time, you could be on the hook for the união estável claim. All right, general principle. I hope that was helpful. Marisa Navas, good to see you over here. Boa tarde, Dr. Luciano. Amamos suas lives. Boa tarde, Marisa. Thank you for your support. I hope you and Ricardo are busy and happy in Lisbon. Okay, let's see what else we have. All right. Okay, maybe because we just spoke about União Estável, I'm going to talk about registrations in Brazil. That's something very typical. We have pretty much every single day some type of case entering the firm, like for either registering a Brazilian marriage in Brazil or homologating a divorce in Brazil. And it was yesterday, like there was a prospect, not a client yet. They spoke with someone from our, like commercial team, and this couple, like they were blaming a prior attorney about an incorrect registration done in Brazil. There was a problem with name change. There was a problem with not informing about a prior divorce abroad, right? And this couple, they were in a very tough situation because they are like retiring. They want to live in Rio de Janeiro, and now they have an issue with their paperwork. So they are coming to us, and they want us to, streamline the case. But now, because they did, incorrect registrations in the past, it may be the case that we're gonna need to file a suit with the court system to ask their records to be rectified. And then naturally, when you deal with like a suit that you're filing, prices are gonna be substantially higher than when you're just doing like the regular registrations and homologations. So the key word here is that you're trying to do the right thing at the right time, and then you're gonna be saving money, and you're gonna be avoiding headaches down the line. All right, Christine. Oi, boa tarde, Luciano. Boa tarde, Christine. Please explain to us about how property is bought and sold in terms of the broker cooperation and agency relationships. Do real estate companies typically represent both the seller and the buyer? Interesting question, Christine. So for those of you who are not from the United States, in the United States there is a pretty settled culture of separate representation, meaning that an agent is going to represent the seller, and another agent is going to represent the buyer. This is very typical in the United States. Another thing that is very typical in the US, which is not typical elsewhere, right, is going to be the MLS. MLS is like a database managed by a US organization trying to keep properties being advertised clean from a databases perspective. What does that mean? Like, it means that when you have a property being advertised, all the ads that you're gonna see out there, they are gonna be referring back to the same registry, if you will, in this single database called MLS. So in the United States, because of that, you have really meaningful advantages, such as you have a very good quality information about sales, because guess what? They are using a single database. They know when the property was sold. They know how much the property was sold for. They know if there was finance or if there was no finance. They know who the realtors are, like the seller's realtor, the buyer's realtor, and so on. Now, when we're talking about the Brazilian market, unfortunately, first thing, we don't have an MLS, meaning that many times you are browsing different portals, right? And you're gonna see different, sometimes, different realtors selling the same property, and you're going to see the same property being sold for different amounts. Very concerning. Now, try to imagine how a buyer from the United States is going to feel when you're dealing with such a messy environment. And then, we get to another point of concern, which is this, make believe that a single realtor would be representing both sides of the transaction. So in Brazil, like when you are contacting listings, right, contacting agencies, typically they're gonna say, well, I'm gonna represent both sides, and there may be an intent to kind of help out both sides, but in reality, the agent, of course, is being paid by the seller. And if you are being paid by the seller, guess where your loyalty is going to be at? Is going to be, like on the seller side, naturally. And so this is something we see very often, right? A client comes to us and say, listen, I want to buy this property. This realtor is saying, they have like a law firm supporting them, which is not usually the case. Sometimes they say they have their in-house counsel, which is basically just there to say amen to whatever the realtor is saying, okay? But typically the seller in Brazil is representing the seller's agent, or the agent advertising the property is naturally representing the seller, not the buyer. And the Brazilian market is not developed enough for people to realize this kind of weird, concerning situation in which you are being represented by the seller's agent, if you will. All right, Christine. So that's the way I see. Now, we have, in Brazil now you have a Remax, and there is a reason for Remax being the largest network of, real estate agencies, in the globe. And the reason is because, they don't accommodate like those kind of, weird ideas. So whenever you're dealing with a Remax in Brazil, typically they are going to have a single database across every single Remax, agency. And so they're trying to replicate the MLS within Remax. A single database, they try to purge bad listings. So let's say if there is a Remax in the countryside of São Paulo state, they would need to follow the same standards that a Remax in São Paulo downtown would. They need to have clean listings and so on. The same thing with the concept of seller and buyers realtors. When you're dealing with Remax, let's say if you contact a Remax in São Paulo and you say, well, but I'm actually interested in buying a property in Rio. Let's say the realtor in São Paulo, as long as they can, provide a meaningful service, they could represent you, while the seller in Rio de Janeiro would be represented by the agent from Remax at that different location. I think there is a slight conflict of interest because both of them would work for the same flag, for the same brand. But what I'm saying over here is that at least the concept of separate agents already exists in the Remax ecosystem in Brazil. All right, Christine, and because we are talking about, buying property and real estate, just share with you, at the beginning of this live stream, we spoke about finance in general, all right? So if you're just arriving now, Christine, make sure to watch the beginning of this live stream for content on finance and seller finance as well. Modafa, hello, Mr. Oliveira. Good afternoon, Moda. Good to see you over here. is investing in stocks of innovative startups or technological companies for 150,000 reais considered as a suitable investment to switch to investor residency? I currently hold temporary residency of a digital nomad. Moda, it does not. It does not. All right. Like, I mean, for this investment to get you access to residency, you gotta own. You gotta own not like stocks sold in the market, but you should figure as a owner in the entity's paperwork, right? So there is a distinction between simply owning a stock and figuring out as a co-owner of the entity. So if we're talking about a large Brazilian innovative startup like being sold at Bovespa. Bovespa is our stock exchange based in São Paulo. If you're talking about this type of stock, for sure it does not qualify. Now, if you're talking about a startup and then you're gonna bring money from abroad to invest in this startup after a bunch of paperwork is done ahead of time, then maybe you're gonna be able to apply, for the investor residency. Okay, we have or we had, right, like, or we have with a certain frequency people who are going to come up with a plan, like creative plans, and when we tested this plan against the requirements, typically those plans will not survive. Particularly when the Brazilian partner, they realize all the entanglements that the investment is going to generate. Okay, so typically we don't like the investor visa, the business, right? Like, I mean, the real estate investor visa, I think it's a different ball game, but we typically don't like the business investor route. And we have a few videos out there. We have a video that we are launching. Not sure it's going to be by next week, right? It is the business investor visa in Florianopolis, and like from the get-go we say, listen, not a good idea, but we're going to talk about it anyhow, because if you don't do it, guess what? There is a bunch of people out there who are selling this stuff as it was perfect, as it was great, and it is not. So we are recording this video to basically educate people, and maybe for a very small share of applicants, that could be a good route. But our opinion is that for the vast majority of people, investing in a business is a pretty bad idea. All right. Christine, yes, thank you for answering my questions. All right, Christine, there you go. Happy to be of assistance. And let's see what else we have over here in our backlog. Remember, if you are here with us, you have a priority to suggest topics of your interest. And I see here 14 people participating in the live stream right now. So don't be shy. Let us know the topics of your interest. And then instead of addressing stuff from our backlog, I'm going to address, topics of your interest. All right. Don't forget about chiming in and saying what's your interest in Brazil or Portugal as well. All right, let's take a look again at our backlog. All right, so about the war. This one is a recent one, like about the war. If there is any impact, like to real estate investment in Brazil. Right, that's interesting because I spoke and it was actually a message I got from a client of ours. Like he bought like a couple of really high ticket properties in Rio de Janeiro, and he's from. I'm not gonna give you too much identify information, but he used to live in Dubai. Right, and we're going to participate in a congress, or we hope to participate in a congress in Dubai that's scheduled for next month, right? And and he was telling me that he thinks, there is going to be a lot of residents of the, Arab Emirates and Arab countries, for that matter, that are going to be trying to diversify, right? So maybe from that perspective, like the war could cause a higher demand of, I would say, more expensive properties in Brazil, if you will. I think this could be one potential consequence. Brazil is also typically recognized as a good plan B whenever there is a chance of a global war. Right now, there is no global war. It's a local war in the Middle East. Naturally, we would love for this thing, to stop, sooner than later. But Brazil, and this is a recurring theme that we see in our consultations for people saying, listen, I think, there may be, something major like a global war, and we want to have a plan B if that happens. So Brazil is typically seen as a good destination when things go bad. All right, that's another take on the war. And yes, I think mostly upside. However, there is a potential downside as well, particularly for off-plan properties. The off-plan market works with a kind of different dynamic. Some people say like they are getting your money is not to actually build the apartment that you're buying. They are actually getting your money to pay for prior commitments, right? So it's a kind of, it's not a Ponzi scheme, but it is a very delicate and fragile type of model, because again, like they're getting fresh money to do, to take care of prior obligations. Now, let's say if there is a global war, do you think anyone is going to buy off-plan properties? Naturally, they are not going to buy off-plan properties. They're going to say, listen, now I just want to buy conservative stuff. And what's going to happen to the off-plan market, I guess, there would be a large number of developers going bankrupt. All right. So at the same time that a global war would potentially increase the market in Brazil for properties already built, I think there would be a collapse of off-plan properties. All right, that's my take, and of course, like nobody can foretell the future. These are just like some thoughts that I have here while reading this question/comment. All right, general principle. Another thing frustrating about multiple listings for the same property is that they do not remove them when the property is sold. There is so many listings for properties that are no longer available. General principle, interesting comment. And there may be, I'm going to share a couple of thoughts on that. The first one is that, those portals, like Zap Imóveis, right? Like they have a package. They actually sell. They do charge per ad, but whenever you're dealing with a real estate agency, many times they are going to charge a package. They're going to say, listen, I'm going to charge you $1,000 a month, and then you can advertise as many properties as you want. And then guess what? The real estate agency, they are not concerned if the ad is out there without, after selling the property, because he's not paying for that thing, right? Like he's just paying a flat fee, and whether he keeps the ad or he removes the ad, his bill is going to be the same at the end of the month. Of course, bad practice, right? Like, I mean, you got to do your housekeeping so you're not like messing up with other people. Now, the second take on it is that there may be a bait and switch. So many times, clients are going to come to us and they say, listen, I see all these nice properties, and then when I'm going to check, guess what? You are sold. But the conversation doesn't stop there, right? The realtor is going to say, well, this one is sold, but I have another one right here for you. So from this perspective, maybe the agency has an incentive to keep like a dead ad out there. So you're going to contact about it. And after being told that it was sold, guess what? Now you have an ongoing conversation with the agent, and the agent can take advantage of this communication to offer you other stuff. All right? Modafa, thank you for the valuable information and advice. Absolutely, Moda. And feel free to share other topics of your interest. Christine, owning a rental property, what if one doesn't spend 182 days in Brazil and not a permanent resident? How do you pay file taxes on the rental income? Christine, so even if you are a non-resident, you can still file taxes in Brazil, right? You can file taxes in Brazil as a non-resident, or you can file taxes in Brazil as a resident. And for the rental income, when you are a non-resident, typically you need to pay the taxes on a monthly basis. Is a kind of withholding process, meaning that, let's say, if you're renting, an apartment that is yours for 3,000 reais, out of these 3,000 reais, the tenant would pay you, I don't know, I'm not going to tell you exactly the numbers, but he would pay a share of the 3,000 reais to you as the landlord, and he would pay another share directly to the Brazilian Revenue Service. Okay, and this would be done on a monthly basis. Now, this is how it should be done, but guess what? Just like many other things in Brazil, there's probably a bunch of people out there who are not following that approach. And believe it or not, even if you contact some accountants, they are not going to know that. I mean, let's say if they never helped a foreign citizen, whenever you show up, do you think he's going to know about that? Naturally, he does not. And if he doesn't take the time to learn, he's going to deal with you the same way he would deal with a Brazilian resident. All right, but just for owning the property, this is not going to trigger a tax residency. And it's very interesting because if you do own a property in Portugal, yes, there may be a presumption that you are a resident in Portugal, let's say a tax resident in Portugal. So, for those of you listening to us with interest in properties in Portugal, just be aware. And there are certain rules that are going to help you clarify to the Portuguese government that even though you have a home over there, you're really not a resident, right? But again, there is a presumption. And in Brazil, there is no such presumption. In Brazil, I could buy 10, 20 properties as a foreign citizen, and you wouldn't have a presumption of residency or tax residency in Brazil. All right, let's see what else we have. Okay, and also sharing, we have some realtors in our network who are foreign citizens. Okay, there is one, we even recorded some joint videos in the past. He's from the Florianopolis, Santa Catarina area, and he's originally from the UK. And he's very happy working as a realtor in Brazil. So if any of you would ever be interested in such pathway, you could contact RE/MAX Rio de Janeiro, right? Like RE/MAX Nomad States, and they do have some type of mentorship for foreign citizens who want to work as a realtor in Brazil, sharing just in case. And I guess that's it for today. I have some good news for you guys. We're gonna be back together on Sunday. Okay, on Sunday, we're gonna have a live stream. We don't broadcast every Sunday. It's actually usually a couple of Sundays per month, and the next one is gonna be this Sunday, meaning March the 8th. And on Sundays, we don't meet at 12:30. We meet at 3:30 Rio de Janeiro time. So I want to say thank you to all of you for the interesting participations, inviting you to join us again on Sunday, and wishing